So in this video, I'm going to explain to you what a CMA is. A CMA stands for comparative market analysis, and it's used in real estate to really evaluate the potential value of a property. Now, I use the word potential because CMAs can be very, very subjective based off who is producing the CMA for you. So there is no perfect tool to plug in a property and get the exact value that it's going to sell for when a home is on the market. It just does not exist at all. So a CMA is done by a real estate agent, but it can really be done by anybody. It's just that a real estate agent has the actual market data that you might not have on the public market. So that's where the difference comes in. So let's just say that we're trying to get the value of a single family home, just as an example. So in a single family home, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take a look at the property. You're going to look at the square footage, and you're going to look at the type of home, and you're going to look at the bedrooms. Now, ideally, what you're going to do is you're going to look at other homes that are the same amount of bedrooms, a very similar square footage, and the same style of home, and look at the price. Now, for a single family home, if you're looking at a Cape Cod style home and a colonial style home, even though they both might have the same exact amount of bedrooms, they're definitely not worth the same amount of money. And most of the time, well, in that example, they're probably not the same square footage, but they could be if it's an oversized Cape Cod. So in that case, you definitely need to look at the style of home. That's why I say that's so important, because if you're comparing like apples to oranges, the prices are going to vary completely. Now, you're also probably thinking, like, how do I know exactly what's considered in the neighborhood or not? So in the neighborhood, it's going to mean that you just don't want to cross any major roads. That's how you're looking at a certain neighborhood. Once you cross a major road, the values can really, really vary. So I know that's very broad. I could typically give a better answer when I'm looking at a place in detail, but that's going to be the general scope of how to do a comparative market analysis. Now, an appraisal is not the same thing as comparative market analysis, because a CMA is typically done by a real estate agent, and we're not licensed appraisers. So an appraiser is also evaluating a property based off different things than a real estate agent would be, because a real estate agent is looking at it as resale value, but you have to remember an appraiser most of the time is working for a bank, so it is very, very different. So how do you get a CMA done? What you can do is you need to contact a real estate agent, or you can also try to produce one yourself, but again, it's very hard to get the market data. There are a lot of softwares out there that will give you an automatic like CMA, and sometimes they can be correct, or at least in a ballpark range of where you need to be, and sometimes they're completely out of left field. Now, Zestimates. Everyone asks about Zestimates, and I know I'm going to have a separate video on that at some point, but right now I'll just talk about it here in this video. Zestimates are, I would say, over the past 10 years, they've gone through a huge up and down period. Now, they used to be incredibly not accurate at all. They used to be way overpriced compared to what we were seeing on the market as real estate agents as a whole, at least, definitely in my area, but I think that other agents across the country would agree as well. Now, I would say that over the past like year to 2 years maybe, they've gotten a lot more accurate, and that also might be because at the time I'm doing this video, prices have increased greatly pretty much everywhere in the country, so that could also have something to do with it. But right now, we're not seeing these huge discrepancies in estimates like we were in the past. So they still tend to be a little overfluffed at times, but at least we're not seeing like these crazy like $50,000 to $100,000 numbers where it's like that you're never going to get that. So this estimates used to be setting people up for like major disappointment, and now it's not as off as it used to be. So to get a CMA, you can work with an agent to get that comparative market analysis. You can get it online, but again, sometimes those aren't as accurate. So I hope that answered all the questions that you have on a comparative market analysis. I know that there also might be very specific questions that you have based off your actual town or your actual neighborhood. So if there's anything I can answer for you, send me an email, or you can leave a comment and I can make another video talking in more detail about the topic. So it's actually easier to comp properties in New York City than it is to comp them in other places, because in New York City, most of the time, if you're looking at a building, so a condo or co-op, you can basically get an extremely accurate number based off what has sold in the building. So typically, when we're doing a comparative market analysis in New York City in a building, we're looking at floor plans, because it's very different from a single family home where you're trying to like figure out another home that's like kind of similar to the one that you're looking at. In New York City, we have that data. It's so easy to find unless your building that you're looking at hasn't had another unit sell with a similar floor plan. We do run into that occasionally, and that's the only time where it makes it a little bit tricky, because you're kind of like the market leader in that sense, where you're the first one trying to sell in a long period of time, and you're kind of testing out the market. Typically, we don't have to do that if we have that data from other units, similar units that sold sold on the market recently. So we're typically always looking at units that sold within a year. You definitely don't want to look back further than that unless you really, really have to, because there's not a lot of activity in your building. And then if that's the case, you have to remember to kind of like take into account where the market is when you're actually trying to list your home on the market. So another thing that affects the value of New York City homes specifically when doing a comparative market analysis is the floor that you're on. So you can't really compare the price of a home in the same building on the second floor as you could the 25th floor, because most of the time the views are going to be very, very different and the sunlight's going to be very, very, very different. So those are both things to really, really consider. Like, where is the unit in the scope of the building? So another thing to consider too is the view that each unit has. That's also something that you're going to need to consider when doing your comparative market analysis. Now, if you pull a similar floor plan, most of the time in most buildings, that floor plan is probably going to be on the same line, which means that it's going to face the same direction in the building. So if it's facing the same direction in the building, then you're going to have the same view pretty much, unless the building clears at a certain amount, at a certain point in the building where these floors have a different view because these floors are blocked by a building. So that's why your value is going to be different based on which floor you're on, because if certain units clear at a certain point and others are blocked by a building or by a tree or something that you really can't see, then that's going to make a huge difference in price. Now, there are also times where there are two floor plans that are identical floor plans in a building, but they're on different sides of the building. So you might get northern exposure or southern exposure compared to eastern or western. They're very, very different. And that as well is going to really, really affect the value of the property. So when you have views of the waterfront or views of the park compared to other units that might be the same floor plan in the building but don't have those views, that is greatly going to affect your price of the unit as well, obviously. So when you're comping townhomes in New York City, that's going to be kind of similar, I would say, to single family homes in the sense that it is a little bit harder because you have to find a townhome that is basically the same bedrooms and a similar square footage in the same neighborhood. I know it's not always easy to find, and there's not as many townhome sales as a whole, so sometimes you might just not have accurate data to go off of. And also, a lot of people really do customize townhomes in New York City to make it their own, so it's really hard to compare one townhome to another because it's just so customized, typically after all the years of like someone owning them. So it's definitely not impossible to comp townhomes, but your agent has to be very, very careful how they comp them because there's a lot of details that really goes into comping townhomes. Now, neighborhoods in New York City are so, so, so important. So you cannot compare something to the west side to the east side. So even when you're in the same neighborhood, sometimes you can't compare the properties in the north side of that neighborhood to the southern side of that neighborhood. Like, that's how nuanced New York City is. So that's why I really like to go building by building. If you can't look at comps within your building because there are none, then you at least need to look at, so first you're going to go off what's in your building, what's selling in your building if it's a condo or co-op. Second, you're going to go off street and then try to go off of bedrooms and square footage. And then third, if you can't find something directly on your street, then I would say go to the neighborhood as a whole, but that's definitely like the last option out of those three.